Hello everyone, a good day to all of you. Today we are going to talk about critical discourse analysis, understanding language, power, and ideology. But before we delve into our lesson, let me introduce myself. I am Isabella Beatriz L. De Claro, and together with me is Mr. Ferolino, Miss Gawan, Mr. Masambo, Miss Palanog, Mr. Presas, Miss Wico, and Mr. Villaflor. And we are the group 2. And again, we will discuss about critical discourse analysis. Okay, so let's understand first what is critical discourse analysis or CDA. When we say CDA, this is a way of studying language that looks at how words are used to shape our society. Meaning, CDA helps us see how language can create, can keep, or can challenge power and inequality. Critical discourse analysis believes that language is more than just communication. Meaning, they believe that it is a social practice. When we say social practice, this means that the way we speak or write, it always connects to culture, politics, and society. Okay? It's more than just communication, it's a social practice. The main goal of CDA is that it uncovers hidden messages, ideologies, power relations, in text, it could be in text, in speeches, in conversations, or even in the media. Okay, so in short, CDA helps us understand how language influences the way we think, the way we behave, and the way we relate to other people. So that is CDA. Now, let us understand what is the difference between CDA and discourse analysis.
Why does critical discourse analysis matters? Because critical discourse analysis reveals how language is used to construct, to maintain, and challenge power dynamics in our society. Language is not just neutral because it often reflects and reinforces social hierarchies, ideologies, and inequalities. Critical discourse analysis helps us uncover the hidden assumptions and biases embedded in texts, speeches, media, and even in our everyday conversations. So, by analyzing discourse critically, we can better understand how dominant groups shape public opinions, influence our policies, and marginalize others. Importantly, critical discourse analysis or CDA also empowers individuals to question taken for granted meanings and resist oppressive narratives. So in this way, CDA, it is not just an academic tool, but it is also used to promoting social awareness, critical thinking, and justice through the careful examination of language.
So hi everyone, my name is Nico, and earlier you guys discussed about the difference between critical discourse analysis and the discourse analysis. But now I'm going to talk about the origin of critical discourse analysis or the CDC. No? So critical discourse analysis, according to my research, started around the 1970s. Pero before that, there was already a field called critical linguistics, which look at how language reflects power on social issues. But later on, scholars felt that wasn't enough. They want to dig deeper. No? They began asking questions like, how does language actually affect society? Or how does it show power? How does it spread beliefs and ideologies? That's how critical discourse analysis was born. Now, let's look at the lower side. It showed on the PPT that there are three main founders of the critical discourse analysis. First is we have Norman Fairclough. No? According to my research, Norman Fairclough is one of the most important figures in critical discourse analysis because Fairclough created a 3D model which studies language in three ways. And the three ways is going to be explained later. No? No, the text itself or the words we hear, the process of communication or how it was produced and understood. And number three is the wider social context or the social practice. His point was that no text is truly neutral. There are always meanings, hidden meanings, and power relations behind words. Second founder that I researched was Tune A. Van Dyke. I'm not sure on how to pronounce his name, but I'm pretty sure that was Tune A. Van Dyke. Si Tune A. Van Dyke, he focused on the link between language, cognition, and society. So basically, cognition, di ba, simply means the way people think or how we think. Van Dyke showed how texts like news report or political speeches can shape people's thoughts. Create stereotypes, and even influence how the society works. His work reminds us that discourse is powerful because it can affect people's minds. Three is we have Ruth Wodak. No, si Ruth Wodak is a female, so Ruth female. She developed the discourse historical approach. This means that she studied language not only in the present moment, but also by connecting it with history and language. For example, when analyzing a political speech, she would consider both what it says now and how the history shapes its meaning. No, this makes critical discourse analysis more complete and aware of the context. So to summarize the info that I given you earlier, the origin of the three main founders of the critical discourse analysis. Critical discourse analysis grew out of critical linguistics because earlier I've said that there is an existing field which is critical linguistics in the 1970s, and that critical linguistics field was shaped by Fairclough, Van Dyke, and Wodak, which is the three main founders that I told you, and all of them have similar belief. One thing is that they believe that language is never neutral. It always carries power, reflects ideologies, and deals with social issues. That is why critical discourse analysis today, no, is so important. Kasi it helps us see the text and speeches are not just simple words, but they are tools that can shape people's thinking or to influence or it can even influence the society, how people think, no? So I think that's it. So for the next slide,
All right, so now we're on to Fairclough's 3D model. So Fairclough explains that every text can be studied into three levels. Okay, we have the text analysis, we have the discursive practice, and we have the social practice. All right, so let's understand these three first before we analyze a speech. Okay, so let's start with text. When we say text, this is in the micro level. When we say micro, it means that it looks closely at the words or language used by the speaker or the writer. Meaning, we look at the vocabulary, what are the choice of words, we look at the grammar and the sentence structure. We also look at the style. Is it formal, informal? Is it persuasive? Is it emotional? And we also look at the rhetorical elements used, metaphors, imageries, all of those. Okay, so that is what the text or the micro level is all about. It looks closely at the words or language used. For example, does the speaker use emotional words? Does the speaker use repetition? Does the speaker use this for, does the speaker use religious or political terms? So that is the text or the micro level. Now, next one, we have the meso level or the discursive practice. So what is this one? This one, it examines how the text is produced, shared, and understood. Okay? Meaning, we ask the question, who created the text? How was it delivered? Is it delivered in a speech way, in a newspaper medium, in the social media, or whatsoever? And who is the audience? And how might the audience interpret the text? For example, a political speech is written by a leader. It was spread in the media and interpreted differently by supporters and critics. Okay? So it examines how the text is produced, shared, and understood. And next one, we have the social practice. So as you can see in the illustration, it is the largest, the broadest one. So this social practice is the macro level, meaning it connects to the bigger picture. Okay? It connects the text to bigger social and cultural issues. We ask questions like, what ideologies are present? Is it about democracy? Is it about religion? Is it about gender equality? Okay, what are the ideologies present? We also ask, how does it reflect or challenge power relations? How does it function in the society? How does the text function in the society? Does it unite people? That is justify a war? Or does it promote values? Okay, for example, the speech might promote national unity or legitimize authority. So that is the social practice. It looks at the bigger picture, bigger social and cultural issues. So in short, to better understand all of this, when we say text, it means what is said. What are the words, grammars, and style in the text? When we say discursive practice, it means how it is said, how it is said, and how it is shared. Production, distribution, and reception. And the last one, social practice, why it matters. Ideology, power, and impact on society. So those are the 3 level of Fairclose 3D model. So now let us try to understand how to use Fairclose model in analyzing a text. Alright, so now let's have a critical discourse analysis of Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Okay, so just to have a short background about this address, okay, on November 19, 1863, President Abraham Lincoln gave a short yet powerful speech at the dedication of the National Cemetery in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. This was the site of one of the most important battles and bloodiest of the American Civil War. The speech later became known as Gettysburg Address. Even though it was only 2 minutes long, it became one of the most famous speeches in history. President Lincoln, honored the soldiers who died and reminded the nation of its core values. liberty, equality, and democracy. The speech refined the Civil War as a fight not just for the Union, but for the principle that all men are created equal. Okay, so now that we know the background, let's hear the speech of Abraham Lincoln, and then afterwards, let's have the very close 3D model to analyze the speech.
Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation, or any nation so conceived and so dedicated, can long endure. We are met on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here, dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Alright, now let's start analyzing the text of Abraham Lincoln. Let's first start with the micro level, which is the textual level or the textual analysis, understanding words, grammar, rhetoric, and imagery used in the sentence. So for us to better understand the textual level, the group 2 used a line-by-line analysis to the text or to the speech of Abraham Lincoln. Alright, so now let's first go to the first line. So this is the first line of President Abraham Lincoln. 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. So here in line 1, President Lincoln uses elevated vocabulary like the word conceived and proposition to give this speech a solemn tone. He also makes an allusion to the Declaration of Independence through the phrase, all men are created equal. The pronoun, our fathers, creates a sense of shared heritage, while the metaphor, conceived in liberty, presents the nation as a child born of freedom. This opening line of President Abraham sets the foundation, reminding the audience that the Civil War is ultimately a test of the nation's founding ideals. All right, now we're on to line 2. President Abraham said, "Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether the nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure." So here in line 2, Lincoln shifts from the past, the line was from the past, to the present. He uses the word testing as a metaphor, showing that democracy itself is on trial. The repetition of that nation ties back to line 1, emphasizing continuity. Vocabulary such as engaged and endure highlights seriousness, portraying that the Civil War was a struggle for the nation's survival. Next one, we have the line 3. Lincoln said, "We are met on a great battlefield of that war." So what does line 3 mean? In this line, President Lincoln speaks more plainly and directly compared to the formal language in the line 1 and 2. He points out that they are gathered on an actual battlefield. Where they are standing is on the actual battlefield, bringing the speech back to the present moment and the real life where the lives were lost. So the word "we" is important because it makes the audience feel included and united in honoring the sacrifice made there. This line also acts as a bridge, meaning it connects the big ideas of freedom and survival from the first 2 lines to the real battlefield of Gettysburg, showing how those ideals were defended with real blood and sacrifice. Okay, so the line 4 is, "We have come to dedicate a portion of that field as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that that nation might live." Alright, so what does line 4 mean? So here, President Abraham Lincoln says that they are gathered to set aside part of the battlefield as a cemetery for the soldiers who died. Words like dedicate and resting place give the line a solemn and respectful feeling. He points out a powerful truth. The soldiers died so that the nation could live. Again, the soldiers died so that the nation could live. This shows how their sacrifice gave life and survival to the country. And this way, the battlefield is not just a land anymore. It has become a sacred ground. Gettysburg also became a sacred ground, a place that honors those who gave their lives for freedom and democracy. Alright, and the last line we have, "It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this." So, in this line, President Abraham is saying that dedicating that cemetery is the right and most honorable thing to do. The phrase "fitting and proper" makes it sound formal and respectful, almost like the language used in ceremonies. The word "should" shows a sense of moral duty, that it isn't just appropriate but something they truly owe to the fallen soldiers. This line also works as a transition because in the coming line, no, he will move to explain that there is an even greater meaning and responsibility beyond the ceremony itself. Alright, so we have our 6th line. It says, "But in a larger sense, we cannot dictate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground." So here in line 6, President Lincoln changes direction. He repeats the phrase, "we can not," 3 times to create rhythm and emphasis. This repetition highlights that their words are not enough compared to what the soldiers have already done. He also uses sacred words like consecrate and hallow, which give the battlefield a religious and holy meaning. By doing this, Lincoln suggests that the soldiers' sacrifice has already made the ground sacred beyond what any ceremony or speech can add. These lines show humility. Lincoln admits that speeches, no matter how well written, can never match the power of the soldiers' actions. The brave men, living and the dead, who struggled here have consecrated it, far above our poor power to add our detract. So, in this line, Lincoln says that it is not the living or the speakers who make the battlefield sacred. It is the bravery and the sacrifice of the soldiers, both the living and dead. He contrasts the brave men, with the audience and leaders, showing that the real honor belongs to the soldiers, not the people giving speeches. The phrase add or detract is an example of antithesis. It shows that no matter what word are spoken, they cannot increase or reduce the honor already earned through sacrifice. This line continues the idea from line 6. True consecration of the battlefield does not come from words or ceremonies, but from the soldiers who struggled and sacrificed. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. Okay, so what does line 8 mean? In this line, Lincoln contrasts words with actions. He says that people may not remember his speech, but they will never forget the sacrifices of the soldiers. This is an example of antithesis. What does that mean? There is a contradicting of two ideas, difference between saying and doing. There's also some irony here, because the speech itself became one of the most famous in history, even though Lincoln claimed it would be forgotten. The repetition of the word here reminds the audience of the sacredness of the place. It's not just any battlefield, but a lasting symbol of sacrifice. By using a mix of positive and negative statements, not remember what we say versus never forget what they did, Lincoln makes the soldiers' deeds feel even more permanent and powerful. It is for us, the living, rather, to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus so far so nobly advanced. In this line, Lincoln shifts the focus from dead to the living. He makes a contrast, us the living versus they who fought. This shows that while the soldiers sacrificed, it is now the responsibility of the living generation to carry on their mission. He calls it the unfinished work, meaning that the fight for freedom and equality is not yet complete. The phrase nobly advanced honors the progress already made by the fallen soldiers, but also shows that more must be done. Here, Lincoln uses a metaphor. The work is not just the fighting on the battlefield, but the larger project of democracy itself. He is saying that the living must stay dedicated to completing what the soldiers died for, preserving the nation and its ideals. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us. So here in line 10, Lincoln continues to focus on the living generation. He repeats the word dedicated to emphasize the theme of responsibility and commitment. The phrase great task shows that the duty ahead is not only about finishing a war, but also about preserving democracy itself. By using this wording, Lincoln elevates the struggle into something larger and more meaningful than just a battle. This line also connects directly to the unfinished work from the previous line, keeping the speech cohesive. It reminds the audience that what the soldiers started, the living must continue.
Okay, let's read this speech of Lincoln. That from this honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they give the last full measure of devotion. So good afternoon everyone. My name is Ranjit Bimasambo. I'm going to read the line 11 and disseminate it for you in textual level micro, which contains a word, grammar, rhetoric, and imagery. So the line was that from this honor that we take increased devotion to that cause for which they give the last full measure of devotion. Inward, Lincoln mentioned that honor dead, and follow he say the last full measure of the devotion, arguing that the living is showing greatness and commitment towards the ideal of freedom and equality. Next is grammar. So the devotion is a repetition which adds the rhythm and emotion. He used also a passive voice to focus and highlight the sacrifices over the individual action. Next is rhetoric. Lincoln uses a parallelism, emotional appeal, and elevated wording to make the soldier death sound notable and inspiring. So the imagery of this line, we imagine that the soldier and their life is what sacred or gift for the ideal of freedom, calling living to continue their mission. Next is that we here highly resolve that this dead shall not have died in vain. Let's read the line 12 of the speech of Lincoln and disseminate it into a textual level micro. So it said that we here highly resolve that this dead shall not have died in vain. In words, Lincoln used highly resolve, emphasize the strong determination, and other sentence is shall not have died in vain, which means their sacrifices must have purpose. Next is in grammar. So Lincoln used a future perfect passive so, so in the sentence of shall not have died, which is emphasize the outcome of the sacrifice of those soldier in the future. In rhetoric, he used the emotional appeal of pathos to give meaning to the soldier that's a moral obligation um, is placed on the living. Next is imagery. So we imagine that those soldiers that was not wasted, however, but they gaining dignity for only to continue their fight in the future. That this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. So the next line that we disseminate in a textual level is it said that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. So in word, Lincoln used under God as adding moral and spiritual authority, and also he adds new birth of freedom, suggesting the renewal and fresh start for the America. The next is grammar. In shall, as you notice in shall have, is a future tense. He added it showing hope and certainty to the people. Next is rhetoric. Lincoln used a religious reference under God and also metaphor for a new birth to inspire those people to go on, inspired to unity and more and do moral duties. Next is imagery. We imagine that the nation being reborn like a child or um, a baby into a stronger form of liberty, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. Good afternoon, everyone. We are now in the end of the speech of Lincoln. It said that the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. So, in the word, we call it triple phrase because it defines the democracy of government belongs to the people, only people, and serves them. So, in the grammar, Lincoln used the phrase using parallelism, which the structure repeated in three times for rhythm and memorability. And the shall not perish, the verb shows the determination that democracy will survive. Next is rhetoric. The repetition um, make the message more powerful and persuasive to the people, appealing and boost the pride and unity towards the people. So next is imagery. So we imagine that democracy is weak and kind of fragile that could be perish in the future. However, Lincoln assured and it will endure every challenges it face at people's will.
So we are now in critical discourse analysis of Abraham Lincoln Gettysburg Address using Faircloth's in 3D model. So in number 2, we have discursive practice or the meso. We have the production, distribution, and recontextualization. So in discourse practice, we have first the production. So the speech was written and delivered by the President Abraham Lincoln on November 19, 1863 during the American Civil War. So it was intended to honor fallen soldiers. The war was a struggle for equality and national unity. So the speech was carefully composed, brief, and symbolic. So in historical context, uh, the Gettysburg Address was delivered by Abraham on November 19 in 1863, just like I said, at the dedication of a cemetery of the soldiers who died in the Battle of the Gettysburg. So that is one of the Civil War's deadliest battle. So in political context, Lincoln crafted a speech to redefine the war not merely as a fight for union, but as a struggle for equality, liberty, and democracy. So Lincoln used the speech to redefine the purpose of the war, not just to preserve the union, but to fight for equality, liberty, and democracy. So we have here the intertextuality. So echoes Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. The speech also shown as intertextuality by echoing the Declaration of Independence, especially the idea that all men are created equal, linking the Civil War to the founding values of the United States. Also, Lincoln uses a religious language like consecrate, hallow, and under God. So to give the battlefield a sacred, almost spiritual meaning, it aligns the Union cause with divine purpose. So by drawing on funerary and sacred discourse, He honored the fallen while giving the war a moral and spiritual weight.
Okay, so now we are still on the discursive practice, but our focus is now on the distribution. In Fairclough's model, distribution looks at how a text travels after it is produced, how it spreads, who gets access to it, and how it is reinterpreted in different contexts. Okay, so in the Gettysburg Address, the immediate delivery was that Lincoln first spoke it live in an audience of politicians, soldiers, and grieving families. In this first form, it was a solemn oral event. It was direct and emotional. The media circulation was that right after, the speech was reproduced by newspapers across the Union. Because there was no recording technology that time, what happened is that reporters tried to transcribe it, which led to a slight difference in wording depending on the newspaper. This shows how distribution can shape or alter a text as it spreads. On its national reach, the short length and poetic, memorable style help it spread quickly. Citizens who had never been to Gettysburg could still receive the speech through print. Its long-term distribution or recontextualization is that the speech was later included in textbooks, commemorations, and political documents. Over time, it became canonized, treated almost like scripture in American civic life. Its distribution across schools, ceremonies, and archives helped fix it as a part of the national identity. To simply explain, in terms of distribution, Lincoln words did not stay in Gettysburg. First, they were heard by the live audience, then through newspaper. The speech spread across the country with some differences in wording. Because it was short and memorable, it circulated widely and was easy to preserve. Over time, through reprinting in textbooks and use in national ceremonies, the Gettysburg Address was distributed so broadly that it became a permanent part of American culture and democracy.
Now we're on recontextualization. Recontextualization means taking words or a phrase from their original text and then using them again in a new situation with a new meaning. The words stay the same, but the way we understand and apply them can change depending on the time, place, and audience. The phrase we see in the slide is government of the people, by the people, for the people. This line was first spoken by Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War in his Gettysburg Address. At the moment in history, the meaning was very specific. It was meant to inspire unity and emphasize that democracy should survive despite the war dividing the country. Today, this phrase is no longer tied only to that speech or that war. It has been reused in modern debates about democracy, freedom, and equality all over the world. Politicians may use it in their speeches to show that they stand for the people. Activists quote it during protests or campaigns for human rights. It also repeated in schools, books, and media to explain the meaning of democracy. The phrase has grown far beyond its original moment. What was once about American civil wars has now become a universal slogan for democracy. So when we hear government of the people, by the people, for the people, today we don't think only in Lincoln's speech. Instead, we think of the general idea of democracy, the rights of citizens, and the belief that government should serve their people. Next,
Hi everyone, my name is Nico, and today let's talk about the third level of foreclosed 3D model, which is the social practice level. No? So this level is about looking at the bigger picture, what Lincoln's speech means in society, or on how it connects to ideology, power relation, and function of his words. So basically, it answers what message was Lincoln trying to send to the people, or why was it more important at the time? No? So next slide please. The first big idea was democratic idealism. Kasi Lincoln started his speech by reminding the people about the founding of the United States. He said sa speech niya that all men are created equal. By saying this, he's not just remembering the past. He is reminding everyone that the country was built on freedom and equality. This is important because the Civil War was a test of whether those democratic values could survive. Lincoln is telling that the people, this war is not only about winning battles, but the truth is it's about protecting the nation's true ideals. It is about protecting the nation's true values, which is freedom and democracy. That's why democratic idealism was applied in the speech, and that was it. Next one is national unity and continuity. Record that. Okay, recording. National unity and continuity. So, Lincoln shows that the Civil War is more than just a fight between North and South, because he connected it into the very beginning of the nation when he said sa part ng speech niya, now, we are engaged in a civil war, testing whether the nation or nations so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. Basically, he's telling the people that the war is about survival. Kasi if the Union falls apart, then the whole meaning of America, which is freedom and equality, will also collapse. So instead of seeing the war as only about land or politics, etc., Lincoln presented it as a struggle to keep the United States alive. In this way, he gives the war a larger and deeper purpose. Let's proceed to the third idea, which is the civil religion. If we look closely at his word choices, Lincoln uses the term that almost sound religious. Like for example, yung consecrate, hallow, or under God. No? Just by using this kind of sacred language, he made democracy sound like a holy duty in his speech. Because he wants the people to see democracy not just a system of the government, but instead he wants them to see it as something spiritual, something they must honor and protect. It's like he's turning democracy into a kind of faith where defending becomes a sacred mission. Yeah, as you can see, Lincoln is not only honoring the soldiers, he is uplifting the democracy itself as something holy. He wants the people to see that the protecting freedom and equality is not just about politics, but a sacred duty. It's as if he's saying that defending the nation is like serving God. No, I think no those lines na using uh, sacred language is really powerful because it unites people on deeper level. Kasi during the Civil War, many families were grieving because of the war, and religion was something they held onto for hope and comfort. No, by using those sacred terms, si Lincoln connected it to democracies, to people's faith. He makes them believe that fighting for freedom is part of a higher mission, something blessed and guided by God. Okay, that's the third idea, which is civil religion. Now let's proceed to the fourth idea, which is the rebirth narrative. So rebirth narrative comes from Lincoln's powerful line that, for example, the line is that these nations under God shall have a new birth of freedom. No, here as you can see on the line, Lincoln is giving the people hope. Kasi the Civil War was a time of great pain, loss, and division. 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 But Lincoln says that something good can still come from it. He's telling them that out of all bloodshed, not shed and sacrifice, the United States can be reborn stronger and freer than before. This new birth means that the country will not just continue as it was, but it will move closer to its true ideals. It will move closer to its true ideals, which is what? Freedom and equality. And those soldiers who died will not die for nothing. Instead, their sacrifice will create a better future for the nations. I mean, in simple words, no, Lincoln is saying, yes, the war is hard and painful, but it has a purpose. The deaths will lead to a reborn America, one that is more united, more equal, and more committed to liberty. This message was very powerful in that time because it gave meaning to the suffering and and it encouraged the living to keep fighting, not just to win battles, but to build a future where democracy would survive and grow stronger. And for the next reporter,
So let's talk about the power relations on Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. Okay? So we have here first Union hegemony. So in his speech, Lincoln only talked about the Union. He never even he never even said the word Confederacy, and this made the Union appear as the only true and rightful country. However, by leaving the Confederacy unnamed, it looked like it didn't even deserve recognition. Some wise in this way, the Union became the center of attention, the stronger side, and the only authority that mattered. In simple words, Lincoln made the Union look strong, rightful, and united, while the Confederacy looked weak and unimportant because it wasn't mentioned at all. And when we say Confederacy, this is the South which they separated from the US because they wanted slavery and they became the enemy of Lincoln's in the Union Civil War. Okay? And the second one is collective responsibility. So in his speech, Lincoln reminded people that the soldiers who died gave their lives for the nation. And he then said it is now the duty of the living to continue what the soldiers started. This means that all citizens, not just the army, but um, everyone had a role to play in keeping the country alive and protecting its freedom. Additionally, ordinary people became part of the nation's mission, not just those on the battlefield. Okay, not just the army. In simple words, um, Lincoln gave responsibility to everyone's citizens. Everyone had to help protect the Union, not only the soldiers again. Okay, as what I mentioned earlier, not only the army but everyone. Okay, so the third one is exclusion through silence. So Lincoln stayed silent because slavery and about the Confederacy. Okay, he didn't he didn't want to give them space in his short but powerful speech. And if he mentioned them, it might have shifted attention or given them some honor. And by not mentioning them at all, Lincoln kept the focus only on the Union's mission, like the freedom, unity, and democracy. In simple words, he ignored the enemy and the slavery issue so that all attention stayed on the Union's values and goals. Okay? And the fourth one or the last one is global power projection. So Lincoln said that the war was a test to see if a nation conceived in liberty could survive. This was more than just about America. It was about but it was about proving to the whole world that democracy works can last forever. It and if the union failed, other countries might think democracy um, is weak, and if the union survived, then the U.S. would stand and democracy are strong and worth defending. In simple words, America's fight was not just for itself, but also for the world, global, okay? And the Union wanted to prove that democracy is powerful and can survive. The democracy, okay? In the overall summary, Lincoln's Gettysburg Address showed power in different ways. He made the Union look like the only true and rightful nation, and he also gave duty and responsibility to all citizens, not just the army or not just the soldiers, okay? And also, he keeps silence about the Confederacy and slavery and making them unimportant. And lastly, he showed the world that America's democracy is strong and worth protecting. And that's all my part. Thank you for listening.
Next is legitimizing the war. So redefines the Civil War as a struggle for democracy survival, not just national preservation. So we're talking about how political leaders, especially Abraham Lincoln, shifted the meaning and moral purpose of the Civil War. So at first, the Civil War was largely framed as a fight to preserve the Union, to keep the United States from splitting apart. So this was more about political unity than higher ideals. So but as the war went on, Lincoln and others began to reframe it. So they presented the war as a test of democracy itself. So whether a nation like conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal could survive. So this reframing served to legitimize the war effort. So it gave moral weight to the sacrifices being made by soldiers and civilians. So now, the war wasn't just about keeping states together. So it was about providing that democratic government could endure, even under severe internal conflict. So it also helped justify policies like emancipation, like ending slavery, as central to nations' democratic ideals, not just military strategy. Next is memorializing sacrifices. So, sacralizes the dead soldiers, giving meaning to their deaths as part of a larger democratic project. So we're talking about how speeches like Lincoln's Gettysburg Address transform individual loss into collective purpose. So the soldiers who died at Gettysburg and in the Civil War overall did not die in vain. So their deaths were given sacrifice not just as casualties of battle, but as holy offerings for the survival and renewal of democracy. So in other words, the battlefield becomes almost like hallowed ground, consecrated not by ceremonies, but by the blood of those who fought there. Next is mobilizing the living. So transforms mourning into motivation, calling the audience to be dedicated to the unfinished task of freedom. So instead of letting the nation sink into sorrow over the massive loss of life, Lincoln urges the living to take up the cause for which the fallen gave the last full of measure of devotion. So their death becomes a call to responsibility, a reminder that the fight for democracy and equality is not over. By asking the audience to be dedicated to the unfinished work, he moves them emotionally from passive mourners to active participants in shaping the nation's futures. And lastly, the nation building. So reconstruct American identity by linking past 1776, present civil war, and future rebirth of freedom in one continuous democratic narrative. So we're describing how Lincoln weaves a story of America that makes the nation's identity feel whole, purposeful, and distant for freedom. So he reaches back to 1776 to the Declaration of Independence, reminding people that the country was conceived in liberty. So he connects that founding ideal to the present crisis of the Civil War, framing it as a test of whether those principles can endure under the greatest strain. So finally, he looks forward, envisioning a new birth of freedom, a future where democracy is stronger and more inclusive. So in conclusion, critical discourse analysis is a vital tool because it shows how language is never neutral. So it reveals how words are used not only to communicate but also to exercise power, shape beliefs, and influence social structures. So through CDA, we can uncover the hidden ways that political speeches, media reports, educational texts, and everyday conversation legitimize authority, challenge inequality, and construct collective identities. By connecting language, power, and society, CDA helps us see how discourse both reflects and transforms the world we live in. So making it essential for understanding how ideas become action and how societies evolve through the power of words. So CDA encourages us to question every discourse we encounter, like who benefits from this way of talking, what ideologies are hidden within it, or how does it shape the way society thinks, acts, and organize power. So by asking these questions, we become more critical, informed participants in society, aware of how language can be used to include, exclude, legitimize, or resist.